Hello, this is Truth Be Told Transformation, and I'm Bonnie Burkert, here to share tools for transformation to live your highest truth. One thing that's true is that the ancient wisdom, the wisdom of the ancients, should not be forgotten, should not be discounted. And so today I have invited a guest to talk to us about his understanding of that ancient wisdom and how it can apply to modern days. Welcome, Peter Canova.
Hi, Bonnie. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. You too. Very excited to hear that you have a book that either has just come out or is about to come out at this tape date of May 2023. Is that right?
Yeah, it's already out in the market. In fact, it became an instant Amazon bestseller, and we did another reprint of it. So it's called Quantum Spirituality, and it's available right now with all online sellers and bookstores. And the foreword is by James Redfield, who is the best-selling author of the Celestine Prophecies. I'm sure many people in your audience are familiar with that. So
me included,
yeah.
Absolutely, longtime fan. Congratulations, this is really great. Quantum Spirituality, Science, Gnostic Mysticism, and Connecting with Source Consciousness, right? Those are the byline there for us. So
right. I
would love to start with Gnosticism, if we could, please.
Well, the Gnostics were basically a sect that it predated Christianity, but they became among the first Christians. And the unique thing about the Gnostics, and the reason why I picked them above all the other mystical traditions, is that they centered in Alexandria, Egypt, which at that time, 2,000-3,000 years ago, was the intellectual center of the ancient world. And as such, the Gnostics had the benefit of having all the mystical traditions, a confluence of the mystical traditions available to them, from the Hindu, Persian, Zoroastrian, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic philosophy, Judaistic Kabbalism. All these influences were essentially absorbed by the Gnostics. But the real thing that I thought was very cool about the Gnostics is that out of all the mystical traditions that I have read, they were the most scientifically precise. I mean, if they had technical language back in those days, you would have said that they were the first quantum physicists. So they predicted nearly every major modern theory of quantum physics, like parallel universes and the God particle and the Big Bang and so forth. And that's how I kind of became intrigued with the Gnostics. And unfortunately, the Orthodox Catholic Church at that time literally destroyed the Gnostics and tried their best to expunge everything that the Gnostics wrote. And in fact, we would know very little of them except through the writings of their enemies, the church fathers. But in 1945, some Egyptian peasants were poking around a cliff cave looking for fertilizer or manure, and they stumbled onto these papyrus, these earthenware jars inside the caves, and when they broke them over, out spilled these texts. So there's a very interesting story behind that whole thing. It almost reads like an Indiana Jones kind of a movie, but we did, recover, fortunately, some of the wisdom of the Gnostic mystics from this find.
That's really, really interesting. And do you know to what extent, so was that big revelation back when these, I'm calling them scrolls. I don't know if they were scrolls, but I'm probably
they were scrolls.
Yeah, I mean, was that like a huge reveal that then got translated and was able to inform, I don't know, spiritual seekers back in the 50s at this point?
Like many finds of that kind, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, it took a while for it to be circulated and absorbed and even realize what they had discovered. So, right at 1945 and probably for the next decade after, I don't think, it probably had much effect. But when it started to be circulated amongst scholarly channels, then I think people realized, wow, these are the writings, the suppressed writings of the ancient Gnostic masters. And I think that it probably, if you take a fast forward up to our age, I think it has had an effect, probably not in as wide a circle as could be, but certainly amongst scholars and amongst spiritual seekers, I think it's had a tremendous effect because it opened up a window on essentially what was a lost spiritual discipline, a lost spiritual body of information that really is incredible. And I think that my book is one of the first to really tie it into the scientific findings of the modern world in terms of quantum physics. So I'm not really aware of anybody that has done that yet. So that's my sort of, contribution to things. And hopefully, my efforts will help make people more aware of the contents of these tremendous texts.
Well, that's amazing. And I would like to ask if you would maybe give us an example. Obviously, we want people to pick up your book, but give us an example of some of the the parallels between then and now.
Well, in order for people to understand that, I have to go a little bit in depth into some of the Gnostic creation story, because it's really only in that context that these things make sense. But essentially, the Gnostics said that there is only one thing in creation, in reality, and that is an intelligent consciousness, an intelligent energy. You can call that God. You can call that the supreme being. You can call that the source. I tend to call it the source. It's all the same thing. It doesn't matter what you call it. Maybe I should use the word God just to make it more familiar to people in the audience. So God is the singular consciousness that creates everything. And God projected its essence out and formed other points of consciousness, which you could call spiritual beings. You could call them dimensions of vibration. You could call them angels, which the ancient Christians may have called them. What they really were projections of the one consciousness, individual projections, and they sort of existed in this orbit around the source. You can think of the way that our planets orbit the sun, and these other points of consciousness would essentially be more or less in harmony with the supreme source. So the interesting thing is that the way that the text described this whole process was that this was not a creation. The Gnostics would say there's no such thing as creation, because creation is something that you make that's apart from yourself. So let's say Geppetto made the puppet Pinocchio. Pinocchio is a separate creation from Geppetto, a separate being from Geppetto. But the Gnostics said that's not the way it worked in terms of in terms of reality as we know it. That this one intelligent energy literally flowed parts of itself out. It projected parts of its essence out to form these other spiritual beings. And the reasons why it might do something like that, there's a lot you can go into there, but essentially you can sort of say it projected out parts of itself to reflect back on itself. Because when you think about it, if you have a being that's everything, that's infinite and everything, that can be a pretty static existence. So you can only understand yourself in contrast with other things. So the Gnostics said that that was the motivation for the one source to project out different points of consciousness. So these different points of consciousness were really aspects of the divine mind, or this supreme energy. And they were given names like love, justice, truth, wisdom, essentially archetypes, Jungian archetypes or Platonic archetypes, which are, images that are very deeply ingrained within our souls that guide our lives and affect our lives. They're ideals. So the youngest of these projections was called Sophia. Now, Sophia means wisdom in English. Sophia, the wisdom is in all throughout the Bible. We don't know about Sophia because we get the English translations, and the English translation uses wisdom in the Bible. But Sophia, being wisdom and being the let's say projected the farthest out from the source, had the thought in mind that she and for convenience sake, you can think of her as a person, but these aren't people; these are intelligent currents of energy in effect. Sophia decided that she wanted to create on her own. She wanted to exert her individuality. So she kind of breaks from the hive mind. She kind of breaks from the orbit of heaven. And she projects herself out onto something that is called chaos. And it's very interesting because scientists today still use the term chaos to describe the undifferentiated form of energy that has not yet become matter. It's called the quantum foam, the quantum field, or it's essentially called chaos because it hasn't organized itself yet into something that is recognizable as a form. So Sophia projects herself out into this chaos, right? And a very interesting thing happens. There was a substance in chaos called proto-matter. Now, that's a very, very interesting term for ancients to use. It means something that preceded matter. It's not yet quite matter. Modern science uses a term that is pretty much identical with what the ancients were describing. It's called virtual particles. They're particles that have not yet become matter, but they have the potentiality to become matter. So these virtual particles, or this proto-matter, starts to swarm around Sophia. And, it swarms around her like iron filings would be attracted to a magnet. And it starts to absorb her energy. And she gets alarmed and she cries out to heaven, I am becoming as lead. Save me from this matter that I am becoming. So what's happening here is there's this energy transformation that's occurring where Sophia's energy has activated these particles, these virtual particles of proto-matter, and is now starting to turn them into matter. And the text literally describe it that way. They're talking about all of a sudden this dimension of matter is being formed by this contact of the high energy and these lower virtual particles. Now, the God particle, first of all, there's a couple things going on here. Number one, we have a description of the parallel universes, because when God projected out these different spiritual entities, essentially they weren't people as we know it. They were actually dimensions of vibration. That's how the Gnostics call them. They call them parallel dimensions of vibration. So right away, you have parallel universes that they're describing. The second thing is this whole action of Sophia morphing with the virtual particles in chaos is a pure description of the God particle. In our universe, there's something called the Higgs field. And when energy enters into our universe, these particles in the Higgs field, they're called Higgs bosons, and they literally attach themselves onto these streams of energy coming into our universe, and they slow them down. And in that action of slowing down, these energy streams start to essentially coagulate into matter. So just the same way that Sophia's high energy was intercepted by these proto-matter or virtual particles, the Higgs bosons attracted to these energy streams is what really causes mass in our world. It creates mass and matter, because matter is nothing but energy in a slowed down vibration. So we have parallel universes and we have the God particle. Now, the third thing is the Big Bang. So what the text described, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long in doing this, but it's kind of a fascinating thing.
Marvelous.
What the text described is that when Sophia contacted this proto-matter and started morphing into actual matter, matter could not coexist in the same sphere as the higher dimension where Sophia had come from, the higher dimension of the source. So it said in the text that this new dimension of matter was expelled in a violent upheaval and projected apart, which is exactly what happened in the Big Bang. The Big Bang essentially was an explosion of something out of nothing, an explosion of something that was visible universe out of something that was invisible that preceded it. So these are just three examples. There's many more, but these are just three examples of how graphically close the ancients came to describing modern theories of quantum physics.
Fantastic. So how are they using it back in the day? What would your understanding be? And again, you mentioned, you described the Gnostics. It sounded like they were in that meeting place of many different tribes of higher thinking. I mean, we had the Egyptians, like you mentioned, right? The Alexandria was ground central, right? Ground zero for
many traditions.
For all this. So, I mean, what's your understanding of maybe what their knowledge, how that intersected with, say, the knowledge of the Hindus? Just curious what you think. And again,
well, the Hindus, for example, I'll give you a very specific example of the Hindus. The Hindus describe the exact same process, except that they call these beings, the projected beings that we spoke of, these spiritual, they call them the mind sons and mind daughters of God. Exact same thing that the Gnostics were saying, just using different language, just using different descriptive terms. So, again, the Hindus were very fond. We have descriptions of Hindu sages in Alexandria preaching that God is light. That's what the Gnostics said. God and everything is really different forms of light energy. And this is what quantum physics tells us. And Max Planck, who was the father of quantum physics, started the whole era by studying the properties of light energy. And essentially, he said, I'm going to read you a quote because this is really interesting. This is the father of quantum physics talking. OK, this isn't, some kind of, new age BS or Swami Ramalama ding dong, giving you the spiel. Max Planck said, I can tell you as a result of my research about atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom into vibration. Behind the existence of all matter is a conscious, intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. This describes to a T what we've just talked about.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to make this a history lesson, but I do need to comment. How in the world did the Library of Alexandria and what happened to these people with their wisdom, the destruction of all of this? I mean, how that set us back, and just your comment on what you think happened, in the trajectory of our human.
That's a very interesting story. Well, there's two separate things here. The Library of Alexandria was burnt by a skirmish that Caesar had when he was in Egypt, and then the Serapeum, which was sort of the lesser successor to the Great Library, was actually destroyed by none other than the Christians. The Gnostics themselves they predated Christianity. But when Jesus began his ministry, they became among the very first Christians because they recognized that Jesus was teaching a Gnostic message that they were very familiar with. Now, the original Christianity, which probably most people don't know, there was no religion called Christianity. It was a spiritual teaching called the Way. So if you had gone back in biblical days and you talked to Jesus's disciples and you said, wow, are you guys Christian? They wouldn't know what you were talking about. But if you said, are you followers of the Way? They would go, that's us. So the Way was a set of mystical teachings that, was probably around before Jesus. But, Jesus being the enlightened being that he was teaching it in a very high form. Now, we know that for a fact because it says in the Bible itself that Jesus taught one teaching to the disciples and the elect and another to the masses. I think the quote that was in all the synoptic gospels was something like, unto the parables he spoke in masses, but to the disciples he gave the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And then we have further testimony by early church fathers like the bishops Origen and Clement of Alexandria, who wrote in their letters that there was indeed a secret teaching of Jesus that was not given to the masses for fear that the masses wouldn't understand it or that it would be corrupted. So the Gnostics recognized this mystical message. And the interesting thing is that the early leaders of the church were almost all females. And in the Gnostic Gospels, Mary Magdalene was the primary disciple, not Peter. In fact, Peter was probably the dumbest of all the disciples. I mean, he just didn't get it. He didn't understand Jesus's teachings. And Mary Magdalene had to explain to him and the other disciples what Jesus was saying, and they resented her for it. So two churches essentially developed. There was the mystical church, and then there was the outer church, which morphed into the Orthodox Catholic Church. The Orthodox Catholic Church did not like the mystics, and they did not like the females leading the mystical church. For one thing, when you basically say that you have everything inside you that you need to know because you are a projection of God, that kind of circumvents the whole church line about, you need to get to God through us. We're the intercessors between you and God. And that's the basis of the priesthood and the hierarchy and everything else. So you can sort of see that was not a very popular message that the mystics were teaching.
Right.
And also the fact that the church at that time was led by females was a big embarrassment to a movement that was trying to get accepted by the Roman Empire. So over a period of time, over the century after Jesus's death, they pretty much eradicated the female leadership. And over the remaining centuries, they really did a job on the Gnostics to the point where they tried to expunge every memory of them. And it was really unfortunate. And the wisdom that we lost was tragic.
Indeed. Where were the Gnostics? Where were they from originally? I mean, were they Northern African? Were they Middle Eastern? Just curious what their
they weren't
was.
a race, or they weren't an ethnic group. They were a collection of people really from all over. Many of them would have been Greek. Some of them would have been Roman or Jewish. But in the ancient world, there was a universal mystical tradition. It's called the perennial philosophy today, and it became differentiated throughout different cultures over different epochs of history. But you could sort of see the same principles, the same basic principles applied no matter what the origin of the teachings were. The Gnostics just happened to be in a place that was, like I say, an intellectual confluence of all these traditions. And they would have been people of, various ethnicities, and the common bond they would have had would have been, the mystical traditions that they adhered to.
Okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying that, because I guess I just put myself there in that time and place, and it's just really interesting to imagine what this.
But I would speculate that the origin probably came from the Far East. I think maybe it possibly was an offshoot of Hinduism. But I mean, if you read the Gnostic texts, they just sound. I mean, today they sound like a Buddhist manifesto. They really. They really have elements of so many of these ancient traditions in their in their repertoire.
So let's bring it back to your book. Tell us a little bit more. So you've given us incredible background, and so bring us to current day. How you're interweaving this knowledge and basically proving, cross-referencing it to prove their principles were science-based. And I mean, that's what's so really interesting.
Let me, probably the best way I can address that is by telling you what my experience was and how I got into doing this and why I got into writing these kind of books.
Please.
So long ago and far away, as they say in Star Wars, when I was in my 20s, I had a series of very vivid experiences that were spiritual experiences. I guess you could also call them psychic experiences. And I found out I was a very accurate medical intuitive, and all people had to do was give me a person's name, age, and address. And on that information, I could provide, a very detailed diagnosis of people's psychological or physical illnesses. And when I realized, to my surprise, that I could do that, because I didn't have anything like this in my background before, I had no inkling of this. And it opened up kind of a floodgate. It opened up a whole world to me. And I started having clairvoyant, clairaudient experiences, premonitions, remote viewing. It just opened, it literally changed my life and set me on a different course, because all of a sudden my eyes opened up to a new world. I realized that there were other dimensions out there, and that this dimension was a product of other dimensions, and that I wasn't really satisfied to have these experiences happen to me, being the Capricorn and coming from the business background that I am, because I probably like the perfect right brain, left brain combination. So, my left brain started working and said, okay, well, I want to figure out the nuts and bolts behind this. How does this happen? So that led me into the research of the ancient texts. And then eventually I stumbled onto quantum physics. And that's not a coincidence, because both the Gnosticism the mystic tradition, and quantum physics deal primarily with the subjects of light, energy, and matter. So I think the fact that I was led to quantum physics wasn't really that much of a coincidence. And I started to connect dots and piece things together. And I did about 40 years of research on this. I ended up writing a highly acclaimed trilogy called the First Souls Trilogy, which was about the first spirits to incarnate into the material world, and it traces their lives over different epochs of history. It's like spiritual thrillers. And then I decided after that the success of that, I said, well, I don't want to let all this research go to waste, even though I describe these principles in the fictional trilogy. It's more like an entertainment medium. I decided to do something that would be more instructive. So I wrote Quantum Spirituality. And what I hope for quantum spirituality is that it's kind of like a roadmap for people on their spiritual journey. And every map has two coordinates. You have an X and Y axis, or you have latitude and longitude. And my two coordinates were the spiritual text and the mysticism and quantum physics. And by showing them side by side, essentially saying the same thing, I hope to inspire people and give them hope that many of these things that we hear and that you and I are talking about today aren't a bunch of new age BS, but there's really something out there. There is really something out there to be experienced. And my ultimate goal is to help people have an experience of this higher consciousness, an experience of these things, not just a book learning or, taking it on faith from me or anybody else, but help get them to the point where they can become their own prophets, have their own revelations.
Absolutely. Amen. I mean, I think, you and I talked a little bit before we got started here about just being of like mind here, of really trying to raise the consciousness to help people live a better life and as individuals and hopefully as a planet. So yeah. How do you feel we're doing? I mean, do you think we can get there? I mean, there's incredible knowledge and there's interest. I mean, a show like mine and Truth Be Told exists because of this interest. So just, would like to know how it's been going for you as you have worked towards the release of this book and, also what comes next for you.
Well, my hope right now, the first book of the trilogy, Pope Annalisa, which is about an African nun who becomes the first female pope in a near future where America and Iran are about to go into a nuclear war. And it's a story about spirit transcending religion and transcending conflicts and transcending gender and transcending all the isms and the conflicts that we have, to reach a higher state and move the world forward, a world that's about to go backward in a very severe way. And we're working on getting that into a TV series. I have a partner now who is an ex-executive at HBO and working to get this into a TV series because I'm trying to help people raise this consciousness in any form, and doing it in the medium of an entertaining form, I think reaches more people. So that's why I started off with a fictional series, because I felt that the principles underlying those books that I was trying to get out there would be more widely disseminated in an entertaining form as opposed to an instructional form like quantum spirituality, even though I hope that does well. But that's really what I'm trying to do is, get these things out there for, to help people get some light bulb moments. But what I do emphasize in the book is I bring this all down because I don't want this to be abstract. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge in here. I mean, I deal with Jungian psychology, quantum physics, molecular biology, epigenetics, all these things that, essentially help people connect the dots. But at the end of the day, it has to go beyond a book learning experience, and people have to incorporate this into some form of a spiritual practice and contemplate on these matters to get to the point where they actually experience some of the things that I've been speaking about here today. So what I'm essentially trying to do is give people a knowledge base and inspire them. So, when I speak in front of audiences, the first thing I often say is, don't believe a damn thing I'm going to tell you. And people sit there scratching their heads like, what do we come here for today? And, what I said, look, I'm not telling you not to listen to me. I'm not telling you not to think about the things I'm saying. But what I'm telling you is just remember everything I'm telling you right now, you have to take on faith. If you don't apply some of the principles and the knowledge that you can see in this book into your own spiritual practice to the point where you have a contact that can bring you back the same type of information that the Gnostics brought back, then you're kind of missing the boat. And when you contact this force, it really transforms your life for the better in so many ways. I mean, this has saved my life. This has helped me in business. This has helped me become an award-winning author. I mean, I really can't even begin to tell you the ways that this has helped make my life better. Is my life perfect? No, not by any means. Nobody's is. I have my share of issues. I have my share of worries. I have my share of fears, but the fear factor is a lot less, because when you understand that we're simply continuations of higher dimensions and that we'll go back to those dimensions after our physical experience ends, honestly, it's not as terrifying. So, that's why I encourage people to really take the information here and go a step further for themselves.
Wonderful. So you mentioned practice, and I know we need to read your book to get the further suggestions, but any little tips that what you mean by that? Meditation?
Well, I have a couple chapters where I talk about meditation, and I'm very reluctant to teach any kind of meditation method, because I think that's a very individual thing that people have to decide themselves. But what I do talk about is many of the factors that can lead to successful meditations and can lead to experiencing this higher information, like the use of visualization, imagination, expectation, desire. There's about a dozen different things I discuss that kind of help people understand the potential ways that they can get the most out of a meditation experience, regardless of what they may practice individually. So yes, the book does very much tie down into the nitty gritty. It gets granular about practice and trying to help people get there.
Oh yeah, no, that's so important. I think to me the power of words and the words we speak, which I think lends itself to thought as well. It's just, it's so incredible, right? I mean, trying to stay on that, you can make a general comment about being glass half full. But I think that kind of perspective really also, I'm sure is probably on your list as well, as far as right language.
Yeah. I mean, language, well, I've always been a fan of language. I think language is very important. For me, language has always been something that is necessary for persuasion, because I've always been either in business or with what I'm doing now. I have to be persuasive in what I'm saying. It has to make sense, and it has to make register with people. And the use of language is a tremendous benefit. I can't teach people that. Fortunately, I happen to always have an affinity, for words and language, and being able to construct thoughts and relay thoughts. And I'll tell you, the most difficult task that I had in writing all my books was taking these arcane spiritual texts, which I read in ancient Greek.
Wow.
And having to contextualize them and make them understandable to the modern mind, and then explain quantum physics to boot, which is totally counterintuitive to the reality that we know. We live in a virtual simulation. The quantum world that makes up our world is nothing like our macroscopic world. I mean, it's totally counterintuitive. I mean, we think the world is solid, but atoms are 99% light, energy, and space, and only 1% mass or matter. We concentrate on the 1%, but we ignore the reality underneath, which is that everything is energy waves, and we're just particularized forms of energy waves ourselves. We're electromagnetic projections of something that we don't really perceive ourselves as much. We perceive ourselves as 3D beings walking in a solid world, when the world is not really solid at all, and we're not really 3D beings. We're more like projections, like a giant hologram. So all this counterintuitive stuff is so hard to explain to people in a way that they won't tear their hair out and walk away. And that was my big task, to make it understandable or to make it entertaining for people. And that's the tightrope that I've had to walk.
Yeah, well, you're doing it very well. I mean, so authoritative, and that is what's so exciting about this. But I like that you also know that there's a way to, perhaps through entertainment, like creating content that has a message, uplifting entertainment content, but also educational. You're sneaking in some ancient wisdom, and people are hungry for it. I mean, I think people definitely want to be knowing this. So, yeah. I mean, it's intriguing. So, any final thoughts on the book and different aspects of it that we can also further anticipate in quantum spirituality?
Well, like I said, the incredible thing about this book is it's so sweeping and all-encompassing in terms of the knowledge it presents. I mean, it gets not only into the ancient texts and quantum physics, but into Jungian psychology, molecular biology, epigenetics. The holographic nature of the universe, an explanation of how we live essentially in like a Star Trek holodeck projection, which is scientifically borne out. Incidentally, more and more scientists are starting to come to the conclusion that the universe operates more like a giant thought in an intelligent mind than a mechanical system of laws, of physical laws. So not enough time to go into all of that right now, but it's really a tour de force of reality and creation. It gives you such a great context and background of knowledge that I hope, like a pyramid, this is the base of the pyramid, and you build your pyramid or your skyscraper on top of the information here. That's my hope.
Excellent. I cannot wait to have a look. Congratulations on the release and all that you've got going on, Peter. You're, beautifully spoken, fascinating wisdom for us. And I'm a fan. I'm a new fan. So I really appreciate you taking some time to talk with us today. And again, I respect the change that the tools that you're really helping us understand, some ancient and how, and some that can be used here in the modern day. So much appreciated.
Yeah, just before we leave, I should mention that if you go to my website, petercanova.com, it's petercanova.com, you can find out a lot more about my work in the book. I also have another website for the trilogy, popeannalisa.com. That's popeannalisa.com. If you check out, those two websites, you'll get a wealth of information just if you never even go any further. So please check it out.
I had a chance to check out some of the podcasts that you're doing, and I do think that the story of Pope Annalisa sounds fascinating. Really, really cool, intriguing story, and in some ways plausible. Like, who knows, could all happen to us. So it's great. Aho, shine that light. I loved where you go with that message for us.
Nice to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks again, Peter. And thanks to you, our listeners. I'm Bonnie Burkert, and this has been Truth Be Told Transformation, with a new episode every Wednesday. And don't forget that Tony Sweet has the original Truth Be Told every Friday at 3 p.m. live. So be sure to join over on the YouTube channel. That's Truth Be Told Paranormal YouTube channel. Ask Tony some hard questions. And Robert Hensley also has the Minuteman Report live on Mondays at 3 p.m. Also YouTube, as well as Truth Be Told Espanol with Metaphor. We are here to share all kinds of different messages to help pique the imagination and open up the mind. So we appreciate you sharing and following and letting people know what we're up to over here. Until the next time, have fun and shine on.